The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under Amara's front door like a snake searching for prey. She almost stepped on it as she rushed to get her 8-year-old daughter Zoe ready for school. The crisp white envelope bore no return address, just her name written in harsh, angry letters that seemed to leap off the paper. Inside, the words hit her like ice water. You have 30 days to vacate our family home. This house belongs to the Johnson bloodline, not some outsider who trapped our son. Leave willingly or we will make your life unbearable. This is your only warning. Amara's hands trembled as she read the letter 3 times, each word burning deeper into her consciousness. The signature at the bottom belonged to Robert Johnson, her late husband's father, a man who had never accepted her marriage to his son James. Even now, 2 years after James's sudden death from a heart attack, they couldn't let her grieve in peace. Mom, you look scared. What's wrong? Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway, her school backpack hanging from one shoulder, concern etched across her young face. Amara quickly folded the letter and forced a smile. Nothing, baby. Just some paperwork. Are you ready for school? But nothing could be further from the truth. Everything was wrong. This house wasn't just her home. It was her sanctuary, the place where she and James had planned their future, where they brought Zoe home from the hospital, where every room held memories of their love. James had left it to her and Zoe in his will, clearly and legally. She had the documents to prove it. As she walked Zoe to the school bus stop, Amara's mind raced. The Johnson family had money and connections in their small Virginia town. Robert Johnson owned the largest construction company in the county, and his wife Patricia came from old Southern money. They had made their disapproval of James's marriage clear from day one, refusing to attend their wedding and barely acknowledging Zoe's existence. They think I'm just going to roll over and play dead, Amara whispered to herself as the school bus pulled away. They picked the wrong woman. The house stood before her as she walked back up the driveway, a beautiful colonial with white columns and a wraparound porch that James had restored with his own hands. He'd painted it pale yellow because Amara said it reminded her of sunshine. Every plank of wood, every carefully tended flower bed, every swing on the front porch told the story of their love. Inside, Amara made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the kitchen table where she and James used to share breakfast every morning. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Sarah Mitchell, the lawyer who had handled James's estate. Sarah, it's Amara Johnson. I need to see you today. It's urgent. 2 hours later, Amara sat across from Sarah in her downtown office, the threatening letter spread between them on the polished desk. This is harassment, plain and simple, Sarah said, adjusting her glasses. You have every legal right to that house. James's will was crystal clear and it's been probated. They can't just demand you leave. But they have money, Sarah. They have influence. What if they find a way? Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. Amara, I've known you for 2 years now. You fought beside James when he was sick. You've raised Zoe on your own. You're stronger than you think. Don't let them intimidate you. But as Amara drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook, past the courthouse where she'd married James, past the diner where they'd had their first date, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Johnsons had made their first move and knowing them, it wouldn't be their last. That evening, after Zoe was asleep, Amara stood on her front porch in the gathering darkness. The street was quiet except for the sound of crickets and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. She thought about James, about how he'd stood up to his family when they tried to talk him out of marrying her. I'm not going anywhere, she said aloud, her voice carrying across the night air. This is my home. This is Zoe's home. And I'll fight for it. The letter had been meant to scare her, to make her feel small and helpless. Instead, it had awakened something fierce inside her, something that had been sleeping since James died. She was done being the grieving widow who kept her head down and tried not to make waves. The Johnsons wanted a fight? They were about to get one. As she turned to go inside, Amara noticed a car parked across the street with its lights off. The silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat was barely visible in the darkness. She stared for a long moment, her heart pounding, but the car didn't move. She double-checked all the locks before going to bed that night, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind through the trees outside her window made her jump. The 30-day countdown had begun, and she had no idea what the Johnsons were planning next. But one thing was certain. They had underestimated her completely. Amara woke to sunlight streaming through the lace curtains James had hung in their bedroom 3 years ago. For a moment, in that space between sleep and waking, she forgot about the letter, forgot about the threat hanging over her home. Then reality crashed back like a wave and she remembered why her stomach felt twisted in knots. She found Zoe in the kitchen, already dressed for school and eating cereal at the counter. Her daughter had James's eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold, and his stubborn chin. Sometimes looking at her was like seeing a ghost. "Mom, Mrs. Henderson next door asked me yesterday if we were moving," Zoe said without looking up from her bowl. I told her no, but she seemed worried about something. Amara's heart skipped. "What exactly did she say, honey?" "She said some men came by asking questions about our house. About whether you were the real owner or just renting." Zoe finally looked up, confusion clear in her young face. "Why would strangers care about our house?" The cereal box in Amara's hand crumpled slightly as her grip tightened. The Johnsons were already making moves, asking questions, trying to plant seeds of doubt in the neighborhood. She forced her voice to stay calm. "Sometimes when people die, there are legal things that need to be sorted out. It's nothing for you to worry about, baby." After dropping Zoe at school, Amara drove to the cemetery on the hill overlooking town. James's grave was marked by a simple granite stone that read, "Beloved Husband and Father." She knelt beside it, brushing fallen leaves away from the base. "They're trying to take our house, James," she whispered. "Your parents think they can scare me away, but they don't know what we built here. They don't understand what this place means." The memories came flooding back as she sat in the grass. She'd been working at the town library when James first walked in, looking for books about carpentry. He was tall and lean with gentle hands that spoke of honest work. His smile had been shy but genuine when he'd asked her to help him find what he needed. "You're new in town," she'd said, not really a question. "Just moved here from Richmond." Heard Millbrook was a good place to start over. He'd been running from his family's expectations then, tired of working in his father's business where every decision had to be approved, every creative idea shot down. He wanted to build things with his own hands, to create something beautiful and lasting. Their first date had been at Murphy's Diner on Main Street. James had ordered pie for breakfast and made her laugh until her sides hurt with stories about his failed attempts at cooking since moving out on his own. When he walked her home that night, he'd stopped at the gate of the yellow house. "That one's for sale," he'd said, pointing at the colonial with the wraparound porch. "I've been dreaming about buying it, fixing it up proper." "It's beautiful," Amara had agreed. "Big enough for a family." The look he'd given her then had made her cheeks warm. "Yeah," he'd said softly. "Big enough for a family." They'd married 8 months later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. James's parents had refused to come, claiming they had prior commitments that weekend. Only Robert Johnson's sister, Aunt Helen, had made the trip from Richmond and she'd hugged Amara tight and whispered, "Don't you let them make you feel like you're not good enough." James chose well. The yellow house had become their project. Every weekend they'd worked together, stripping wallpaper, refinishing floors, painting rooms. James had insisted on doing most of the work himself, saying each nail he hammered was a promise of permanence. "This house is going to outlast us both," he'd said one Saturday afternoon as they took a break on the front porch. "Our kids will grow up here, maybe bring their own kids to visit someday." When Zoe was born, James had carried her straight to the nursery he'd spent months preparing. The walls were painted soft green with white trim, and he'd built the crib himself from oak harvested on his uncle's farm. The mobile hanging above it played, "You Are My Sunshine," the song he sang to both his girls every night. Now Amara sat in that same nursery which had become Zoe's big girl room, holding the threatening letter in her hands. The walls were covered with her daughter's artwork, her bookshelf filled with stories they'd read together. This wasn't just a house, it was the physical embodiment of their love story. Her phone rang, interrupting the memories. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Johnson? This is Patricia Johnson. We need to talk." James's mother's voice was as cold and sharp as Amara remembered. They'd spoken perhaps a dozen times in the 8 years she'd been married to James, and never warmly. "About what, Mrs. Johnson?" "About your situation. I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest if you cooperate with our request. James may have left you that house in his will, but there are other considerations you haven't thought of. Such as the fact that the house has been in the Johnson family for 3 generations before my son bought it. Such as the fact that a single mother working part-time at a library can't possibly afford the upkeep on a property that size. Such as the fact that Zoe would be better off in a more suitable environment." The implied threat in Patricia's voice made Amara's blood run cold. "Are you threatening to try to take my daughter?" "I'm simply pointing out realities, dear. 30 days gives you time to make arrangements. Use it wisely." The line went dead, leaving Amara staring at her phone in disbelief. They weren't just after the house. They were questioning her fitness as a mother. The very idea made her stomach clench with fear and fury. She walked through every room of the house that afternoon, touching surfaces James had sanded, admiring work he'd completed with his own hands. In their bedroom, she opened the closet where some of his clothes still hung. His scent had long faded, but wearing one of his old flannel shirts still brought her comfort. That evening, as she helped Zoe with homework at the kitchen table, her daughter looked up suddenly. "Mom, are we really not moving?" "No, baby. This is our home. Nobody can make us leave." "Good," Zoe said, returning to her math problems. "I like it here. It still feels like Daddy's with us." Amara's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Zoe was right. James's presence was in every corner of this house, in every carefully chosen detail, in every repair made with love. The Johnsons could threaten and intimidate all they wanted, but they couldn't take away what she and James had built together. They had picked the wrong target indeed. The law office of Mitchell and Associates buzzed with quiet efficiency as Amara sat across from Sarah, a stack of documents spread between them. 3 days had passed since Patricia Johnson's threatening phone call, and Amara had barely slept. Every shadow seemed menacing, every unexpected sound made her jump. "They can't actually contest the will at this point," Sarah explained, pointing to the relevant paperwork. "It's been 2 years since probate was completed. The statute of limitations has passed." "Then why are they so confident?" Amara asked, rubbing her temples where a headache had been building since morning. Patricia Johnson didn't sound like someone making empty threats. Sarah frowned, tapping her pen against the desk. "There might be something we're missing. Let me make some calls, do a little digging. In the meantime, I want you to document everything, every phone call, every strange occurrence, every interaction with the Johnson family." As Amara left the lawyer's office, she noticed the same dark sedan from the night before parked across the street. This time she could see the driver clearly, a heavy-set man in a baseball cap who quickly looked away when their eyes met. Her hands shook as she unlocked her car. The harassment was escalating. At the library where she worked 3 days a week, Amara tried to lose herself in the familiar routine of checking and return books and helping patrons find what they needed. But concentration proved impossible when her phone buzzed every few minutes with calls from unknown numbers that went straight to voicemail when she answered. "Having a rough day?" asked Marcus Thompson, the head librarian, as he noticed her distraction during the afternoon shift. Marcus was a kind man in his early 40s who had hired Amara after James died and she needed steady work. He'd been patient with her grief, understanding when she had to leave early for Zoe's school events, and had become a genuine friend over the past 2 years. "Just some family issues," Amara said vaguely, not wanting to burden him with her problems. "The kind of family issues that involve strange men asking questions about your personal business around town?" Amara's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "A guy came in yesterday after you left, asking about your work schedule, how long you'd been employed here, whether you seemed financially stable. I told him our employee information was confidential, but..." He shrugged apologetically. "But what?" "He mentioned he was doing a background check for custody purposes. Said he was a private investigator." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. "Custody? I figured I should mention it. If there's something going on with Zoe's father's family..." Marcus trailed off, clearly not wanting to pry but obviously concerned. Amara's vision blurred with rage. The Johnsons weren't just trying to take her house. They were building a case to take her daughter. She thought of Patricia's cold voice on the phone. Zoe would be better off in a more suitable environment. That evening, Amara called Sarah from her kitchen while Zoe did homework upstairs. "They're investigating me," she said without preamble. "They've hired a private investigator to dig into my finances, my work history, everything." "Slow down," Sarah said calmly. "Tell me exactly what happened." After Amara explained about Marcus's visitor, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "This changes things," she finally said. "If they're building a custody case, they're playing a much more serious game than I thought. We need to be proactive." "What does that mean?" "It means we investigate them right back. It means we find out what they're really after and why they think they can win. And it means you need to be very, very careful about every aspect of your life right now." That night, Amara double-checked all the locks and drew the curtains tight. She'd installed a security system after James died, mainly for peace of mind, but now she was grateful for the cameras and motion sensors. As she was checking on Zoe, her daughter looked up from her book. "Mom, why did Grandpa Robert call me at school today?" Amara's blood turned to ice. "He called you at school?" The secretary brought me to the office to take the call. He said he wanted to talk about Daddy and asked if I was happy living with you. Zoe's brow furrowed in confusion. It was weird. He never calls me. Amara sat heavily on the edge of Zoe's bed, fighting to keep her voice steady. What did you tell him, honey? I said I was happy and that I missed Daddy, but you take really good care of me. He asked if I ever wished I could live somewhere bigger with more kids around to play with. Zoe closed her book and looked directly at her mother. Mom, is someone trying to make me go live somewhere else? There was no point in lying anymore. Zoe was 8, but she was smart and observant like her father. Some people think they know what's best for other families, Amara said carefully. But nobody is going to separate us, baby. I promise you that. Good, Zoe said firmly. Because this is my home and you're my mom and that's how it's supposed to be. After Zoe fell asleep, Amara sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and a legal pad, documenting everything as Sarah had instructed. The timeline was becoming clearer. The Johnsons had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The letter demanding she leave the house was just the opening move in a larger strategy. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Last chance to leave quietly. Things are about to get very unpleasant for you. Instead of fear, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced since James died, a burning, righteous anger that cleared her mind and straightened her spine. They wanted to paint her as an unfit mother? They wanted to steal her home and her child? She picked up her phone and typed back, I'm not going anywhere. Try me. The response came immediately, you'll regret this. Amara smiled grimly as she turned off her phone. Maybe she would regret it, but she'd rather fight and lose than surrender without a battle. The Johnsons had money and connections, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated how fierce a mother's love could be when her child was threatened. Tomorrow she would start fighting back, and she had a feeling they had no idea what they'd awakened. The knock on Amara's door came at 7 in the morning, startling her as she made coffee. Through the peephole, she saw elderly Mrs. Henderson from next door, holding a covered dish and looking determined. Come in, Mrs. Henderson. Is everything okay? Eleanor Henderson was 73 years old with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing in the neighborhood. She'd lived next door for 40 years and had been one of the first people to welcome Amara and James when they'd moved in. Everything is not okay, dear, Mrs. Henderson said firmly, setting her dish on the kitchen counter. And I'm here to tell you that you're not facing this alone. Facing what alone? Amara asked, though her heart was already racing. Don't play coy with me, child. I've watched those men in expensive suits coming and going, asking questions about you and Zoe. I've seen that car parked outside at all hours watching your house. And yesterday, Patricia Johnson herself had the nerve to show up at my door. Amara sank into a kitchen chair. What did she want? She wanted to know about your lifestyle, as she put it. Whether you had men over at night, whether you drank, whether you left Zoe alone. The audacity of that woman. Mrs. Henderson's eyes flashed with indignation. I told her exactly what I thought of her and her questions. Oh no, Mrs. Henderson. I don't want you getting involved in this mess. Too late for that, honey. I've been involved since the day you and James moved in and became the best neighbors I've ever had. She sat down across from Amara. Now tell me what's really going on. Over the next hour, Amara explained everything, the threatening letter, the investigation, the custody implications. Mrs. Henderson listened with growing outrage. Those people never deserved James, she said finally. That boy was worth 10 of his father, and everyone in this town knew it. You knew James before he met me? Oh yes. He used to come visit his great-aunt Helen every summer when he was young. Helen lived just 2 blocks over. James would help her with yard work and repairs, never asked for a penny. Even as a teenager he was different from the rest of that family, kind, hardworking, humble. Mrs. Henderson leaned forward conspiratorially. There are things about the Johnson family you should know, dear. Things that might help your case. Before she could elaborate, another knock interrupted them. This time it was Marcus from the library, looking unusually serious. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, he said. But after what happened yesterday, I did some checking around town. What kind of checking? Amara asked, pouring him coffee. The kind that reveals the Johnson family has been asking questions about you all over Millbrook. At Zoe's school, at the grocery store, at the bank. Marcus sat down heavily. Amara, I think you need to know, they've also been spreading rumors. What kind of rumors? That you're financially unstable. That you've been seen with different men at all hours. That you leave Zoe with babysitters constantly. Marcus looked apologetic but determined. It's all lies, of course, but small towns love gossip. Mrs. Henderson snorted. Well, they picked the wrong neighborhood to spread lies in. Most of us have eyes and brains. Actually, that's why I'm here, Marcus continued. I spoke with several people yesterday, your postal worker, the woman who runs the hardware store, Tom who delivers your groceries. Everyone has the same story. You're a devoted mother and a respectable woman who's been dealt a difficult hand. Amara felt tears prick her eyes. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because decent people need to stand up for each other. Marcus pulled out a small notebook. I've been documenting the counter-narrative. People who can testify to your character, your parenting, your stability. There's more, Mrs. Henderson added with a sly smile. I made some calls to friends who've lived here longer than dirt. The Johnson family has a history in this town, and not all of it's pretty. She explained that Robert Johnson's construction company had been investigated twice for safety violations that resulted in worker injuries. There had been whispers about bid rigging on municipal contracts, though nothing was ever proven. Most interesting, Patricia Johnson had been involved in a nasty custody battle with her own sister years ago, trying to gain guardianship of her sister's children after a divorce. She lost that case, Mrs. Henderson said meaningfully. The judge found her motivations were more about control than care. Over the next few hours, more neighbors stopped by. The Patels from across the street brought homemade samosas and offered to testify about what good neighbors the Johnsons had always been. Old Mr. Murphy, who ran the diner where she and James had their first date, came by to say he'd refused to answer the private investigator's questions and would be happy to speak on her behalf. This is James's legacy, Mrs. Henderson observed as they watched neighbors coming and going. He was kind to everyone in this community, and now they're returning that kindness to his family. By evening, Amara had a list of more than 20 people willing to serve as character witnesses. She also had something else, a growing sense that she wasn't fighting this battle alone. As she tucked Zoe into bed that night, her daughter asked, Mom, why were so many people here today? Because sometimes when bad things happen, good people come together to help, Amara explained. Like when Daddy died and everyone brought us food and helped with the house? Exactly like that. I liked it, Zoe said sleepily. It felt like we have a big family even though it's just us. After Zoe fell asleep, Amara sat on her front porch in the gathering darkness. The street was quiet, and for the first time in days she didn't see the surveillance car. Mrs. Henderson's porch light was on next door, and she could see her neighbor reading in her living room, standing guard in her own way. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Good news. Found something interesting in the public records about Robert Johnson's business dealings. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Amara smiled as she typed back, I'll be there. The Johnsons had made a critical error in their strategy. They'd assumed she was isolated and friendless, easy to intimidate and overwhelm. Instead, they'd awakened an entire community that remembered what James had meant to them and was determined to protect his widow and daughter. For the first time since receiving that threatening letter, Amara felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The battle was far from over, but she was no longer fighting it alone. Sarah's law office felt different this time, charged with electricity and possibility. The lawyer's desk was covered with documents, computer printouts, and legal files that hadn't been there during Amara's previous visits. You're not going to believe what I found, Sarah said without preamble as Amara settled into her chair. The Johnson family isn't just trying to intimidate you, they're desperate. She spread several papers across the desk. Robert Johnson's construction company is in serious financial trouble. They've defaulted on 3 major loans in the past 6 months, and the bank is threatening foreclosure on their equipment and properties. Amara leaned forward, studying the documents. What does this have to do with my house? Everything, potentially. I had a colleague do some digging into the property history of your home. That house has been in the Johnson family for generations, but here's the interesting part. James bought it from his grandfather's estate, not his parents'. Sarah pulled out a thick folder. James's grandfather, William Johnson, specifically willed the house to James, bypassing Robert entirely. Apparently, there was bad blood between father and son over Robert's business practices. So James legally owned the house outright? Completely. But here's where it gets complicated. Sarah's expression grew grim. I found evidence that Robert Johnson has been telling potential lenders that he has claim to the house as collateral for business loans. Amara's stomach dropped. He's been using my house as collateral for loans? It appears so. If he can somehow prove he has rightful claim to the property, he can use it to satisfy his debts. But if he can't? Sarah paused meaningfully. He's looking at bankruptcy and possibly criminal charges for fraudulent lending practices. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The threats, the investigation, the custody battle. It wasn't about family honor or concern for Zoe. It was about money and desperation. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I've been in touch with a source at Child Protective Services. Someone filed a complaint about your parenting 3 days ago, claiming you leave Zoe unsupervised regularly and have financial problems that make you unfit to care for her. Let me guess who filed the complaint." The report lists an anonymous concerned citizen, but the timing is awfully convenient. Sarah's jaw was tight with anger. They're escalating on all fronts simultaneously: legal pressure, social pressure, and now official channels. Amara felt overwhelmed by the scope of their campaign against her. How can they get away with this? Because they have money and connections, and they're betting you'll fold before anyone looks too closely at their tactics. Sarah leaned back in her chair. But they made one crucial mistake. Which is? They assumed you wouldn't fight back hard enough to uncover their real situation. Now that we know what they're really after, we can use it against them. That afternoon, Amara returned home to find a white van parked outside her house. A woman in a business suit was taking photographs of the property and making notes on a clipboard. "Excuse me," Amara called out as she got out of her car. "Can I ask what you're doing?" The woman looked up, slightly embarrassed. "I'm conducting a property assessment for Child Protective Services. There was a complaint filed about the living conditions here. I'm the homeowner. Would you like to see inside?" For the next hour, Amara walked the CPS investigator through every room of her house. The woman examined the cleanliness, safety measures, Zoe's bedroom, the kitchen, and the overall condition of the property. "Mrs. Johnson," the investigator said as they finished the tour, "I have to say, this is one of the nicest, most well-maintained homes I've seen in my 15 years doing this job. Whoever filed this complaint either has seriously mistaken your address or has ulterior motives. What happens now?" "I'll file my report stating that the complaint appears to be unfounded. In fact, I'm recommending the case be closed immediately and that we investigate who filed the false report." The woman's expression was stern. Making false accusations to CPS is a serious matter. After the investigator left, Amara called Mrs. Henderson to update her on the day's developments. "I'm not surprised about Robert's money troubles," her neighbor said. "Helen, James's great-aunt, used to say Robert was always chasing get-rich-quick schemes and cutting corners to save money. You mentioned yesterday that there were things about the family I should know." "Oh yes. Are you free this evening? There's someone I think you should meet." At 7 o'clock, Mrs. Henderson knocked on Amara's door accompanied by a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying brown hair. "Amara, I'd like you to meet Helen Morrison, James's great-aunt." Amara's eyes widened. "I thought you lived in Richmond." "I moved back to Millbrook 6 months ago to be closer to friends," Helen explained. "Eleanor told me what's been happening and I had to come see you." They sat in Amara's living room, and Helen looked around with obvious emotion. "James showed me pictures of what you two did with this house, but seeing it in person..." She dabbed at her eyes. "It's exactly what his grandfather would have wanted." Mrs. Henderson mentioned that James's grandfather left him the house specifically. "William was my father," Helen explained. "He and Robert never got along. Dad thought Robert was too concerned with money and status, not enough with family and character. When James started visiting me as a boy, Dad saw something different in him." Helen opened her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Dad left me some things when he died, including this letter. He wrote it specifically about the house and James's inheritance." Amara opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter dated just months before William Johnson's death. "To whom it may concern, I leave my house at 412 Maple Street to my grandson James Johnson because he alone of my descendants understands that a home is more than a piece of property. It is a place where families are built, where love grows, where memories are made. James has the heart to make this house what it was meant to be. Under no circumstances should this property ever revert to my son Robert, who sees only dollar signs where others see heritage. This house should be a sanctuary for James and his family for generations to come. Why didn't James ever show me this?" Amara whispered. "He probably didn't know it existed," Helen said. "Dad left it with me for safekeeping in case anyone ever challenged James's right to the house. Will this help with the legal case?" "It certainly won't hurt," Helen said with a smile that reminded Amara strongly of James. "But more than that, I want you to know that you have family support. Not all of the Johnsons are like Robert and Patricia." That night, after Helen and Mrs. Henderson left, Amara sat in James's old chair reading his grandfather's letter over and over. The old man's words felt like a blessing from beyond the grave, validation that she and James had created exactly what he'd envisioned. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed Robert Johnson's number. "What do you want?" she answered without pleasantries. "I hear you've been busy today." Robert's voice was cold and angry. "Meeting with lawyers, talking to investigators, stirring up trouble. I'm protecting my family and my home. You know, the things you should understand as a father. Don't lecture me about family, girl. That house belongs to the Johnson bloodline, and I won't let some outsider." "Stop right there," Amara interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I know about your financial problems, Robert. I know about the fraudulent loan applications. I know exactly why you want this house, and it has nothing to do with family honor." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "You don't know what you're messing with," Robert finally said, his voice barely controlled. "I have resources you can't imagine. I can make your life very difficult. You already tried that. It didn't work." Amara stood up, pacing to the window where she could see Mrs. Henderson's porch light still burning. "In fact, all you've done is show this entire community what kind of people you really are. This isn't over." "No, it's not. But you picked the wrong target, Robert. I'm not the scared, grieving widow you thought I was. I'm James's wife, and I learned from him how to fight for what matters." She hung up before he could respond, her heart pounding but her resolve stronger than ever. Outside, the street was quiet and peaceful. Her street. Her neighborhood. Her home. The Johnsons had shown their hand, and now she knew exactly what she was fighting against. More importantly, she knew she had the weapons to win. The emergency family meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at Robert and Patricia Johnson's imposing brick mansion on the wealthy side of town. Amara had agreed to attend only after Sarah insisted she needed to hear their offer face to face, if only to understand the full scope of their desperation. "I don't like this," Marcus said as he dropped Amara off at the gate. She'd asked him to drive her, not wanting to appear vulnerable by arriving alone. "These people have already shown they'll play dirty." "That's exactly why I need to face them," Amara replied, smoothing her best black dress, the one she'd worn to James's funeral. "I want them to see that I'm not intimidated." Sarah was already waiting by her car when Amara arrived. The lawyer looked professional and fierce in her navy suit, briefcase in hand. "Remember," Sarah said quietly as they walked up the curved driveway, "we're here to listen, not negotiate. Whatever they offer, we don't accept or reject anything today." The Johnson mansion was everything Amara had expected: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. It felt cold and sterile, nothing like the warm home she was used to. A uniformed maid led them to a formal dining room where Robert and Patricia Johnson waited with a man Amara didn't recognize. "Thank you for coming," Patricia said with fake politeness, gesturing for them to sit. She was a thin woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and cold blue eyes that never seemed to blink. "I believe you know my husband Robert. This is our attorney, Mr. Crawford." Robert Johnson was a large man in his 60s with graying hair and hands that spoke of office work rather than honest labor. He looked like an older, harder version of James, but without any of the warmth that had made his son so special. "Let's get straight to business," Robert said without preamble. "We have a proposition for you." He slid a folder across the polished table. "We're prepared to offer you $200,000 cash for the house, plus an additional $50,000 for your inconvenience during this transition." Amara didn't touch the folder. "The house is worth at least $400,000. Perhaps to someone with the means to maintain it properly," Patricia said with a thin smile. "But we're offering you a chance to start fresh somewhere more appropriate for your circumstances." "And what circumstances would those be?" Robert leaned forward aggressively. "The circumstances of a single mother with limited income trying to maintain a house she can't afford. The circumstances of someone whose parenting abilities are being questioned by the authorities." "You mean the CPS complaint that was dismissed as fraudulent?" Amara asked sweetly. Crawford, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "There are other considerations, Mrs. Johnson. The house's title history is more complicated than you might realize. There are questions about whether your late husband had clear ownership." Sarah spoke for the first time. "What questions?" "James inherited the house free and clear from his grandfather's estate. The title is absolutely clean. According to some interpretations," Crawford said carefully. "But family property can be subject to various claims, especially when there are outstanding debts involved." The threat was barely veiled. They were going to challenge the title, tie her up in expensive legal battles she couldn't afford to fight. "We're not unreasonable people," Patricia added. We simply want what's best for everyone involved. Including Zoe. Don't you dare bring my daughter into this, Amara said, her voice deadly quiet. She's our granddaughter, Robert said firmly. We have rights too. Rights we've been neglecting out of respect for the grieving process, but which we may need to explore if this situation can't be resolved amicably. The custody threat hung in the air like poison gas. Amara felt her hands trembling and clasped them together under the table. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah asked. Patricia's smile was reptilian. Amara takes our generous offer, relocates somewhere more suitable, and allows Zoe to spend significant time with her paternal grandparents. Perhaps alternating weeks, or even primary custody with generous visitation rights. You want to buy my house and steal my daughter. We want to provide stability and opportunity, Robert corrected. Zoe deserves the advantages we can provide: private school, cultural opportunities, connections that will serve her well in life. She has those things. She has a loving home, a good school, a community that cares about her. She has a mother who works part-time at a library and struggles to pay bills, Patricia said cruelly. We've done our research, Amara. Your bank account, your credit cards, your employment history. You're one emergency away from financial disaster. The words stung because they contained a grain of truth. Money had been tight since James died, and Amara did worry about unexpected expenses. But they didn't understand that some things were more valuable than money. I'd rather struggle honestly than live comfortably with people who don't know the meaning of love, Amara said. Robert's face flushed red. Love doesn't pay for college tuition or medical bills or... Love built the home you're trying to steal, Amara interrupted, standing up. Love raised the son you never appreciated. Love is what's missing from this cold museum you call a house. How dare you, Patricia began. How dare I what? Tell the truth. Amara's voice rose. James used to tell me stories about growing up here. About how you criticized everything he did, pushed him toward goals he didn't want, made him feel like he was never good enough. He ran away from all this when he was 18 and only came back for holidays out of obligation. That's enough, Robert said, standing as well. No, it's not nearly enough. Amara felt 2 years of grief and frustration pouring out. You ignored him when he was alive because he didn't fit your plans. You didn't come to our wedding. You barely acknowledged Zoe's existence. And now that he's gone, you want to take everything he loved and twist it into something ugly and mercenary. James was confused by you, Patricia said viciously. You trapped him with pregnancy and marriage before he could come to his senses and realize what a mistake. Stop. The voice came from the doorway, firm and familiar. Everyone turned to see Marcus Thompson standing in the entrance to the dining room, his usually gentle face hard with anger. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but the maid let me in when I said it was urgent. Amara, you need to leave. Now. What's the meaning of this? Robert demanded. Marcus ignored him, speaking directly to Amara. Mrs. Henderson called me. There was a fire at your house 20 minutes ago. Amara's world tilted. What? Is Zoe? Zoe's fine. She's at her friend Emma's house for the sleepover, remember? But you need to get home immediately. As they rushed toward the door, Robert called after them. This doesn't change our offer, Amara. Think carefully about what's best for your daughter. Amara turned back, her eyes blazing. I know exactly what's best for my daughter. And it's never, ever going to be you. The drive home was a blur of sirens, smoke, and terror. But as they turned onto Maple Street, Amara saw her house still standing, fire trucks pulling away, neighbors gathered on the sidewalk looking relieved. Kitchen fire, Mrs. Henderson explained, hurrying over. Started in the electrical box, but the fire department got it out quickly. Mostly smoke damage. Amara walked through her house in a daze, looking at the blackened kitchen walls, smelling the acrid smoke that would take weeks to clear. But the structure was sound and most of her belongings were salvageable. Funny thing about electrical fires, one of the firefighters mentioned casually. This one started in a way that's pretty unusual. Almost like someone tampered with the wiring. Sarah and Marcus exchanged meaningful glances with Amara. The message was clear. The Johnsons were escalating to dangerous levels. But as Amara stood in her damaged but still standing home, surrounded by neighbors offering help and support, she felt something unexpected. Relief. The confrontation was over. The lines were drawn. The gloves were off. Now the real fight could begin. The smell of smoke still clung to everything 3 days after the fire. Amara had been staying at Mrs. Henderson's house while contractors assessed the damage and began repairs, but she came home every day to sort through belongings and meet with insurance adjusters. The electrical damage was definitely suspicious, the fire inspector told her as they stood in the blackened kitchen. Someone with electrical knowledge tampered with your main panel. This wasn't an accident. Amara wasn't surprised. The timing had been too convenient, happening while she was confronting the Johnsons, while Zoe was safely away at a sleepover. Can you prove it was arson? Not definitively enough for criminal charges, but I'm noting it in my report as suspicious origin. The inspector looked sympathetic. I'd be very careful if I were you, ma'am. Whoever did this was sending a message. That evening, Amara sat with Zoe in Mrs. Henderson's living room, helping her daughter with homework while trying to process everything that had happened. Mom, Emma's mom asked if I wanted to come stay with them until our house is fixed, Zoe said, not looking up from her math problems. Do you want to? No. I want to stay close to home even if we can't sleep there yet. Zoe finally looked up. Are the people trying to take our house the same ones who heard it? Amara had tried to shield Zoe from the worst of what was happening, but her daughter was too smart to fool completely. I don't know for sure, baby. But some people do bad things when they don't get their way. Like bullies at school. Exactly like bullies at school. And you always tell me that bullies only win if you let them scare you. Amara smiled despite everything. That's right. Then we're not going to let them scare us, are we? No, we're not. But privately, Amara was more frightened than she'd ever been. The fire had crossed a line from harassment into actual danger. What if Zoe had been home? What if the fire had spread faster? Her phone rang, interrupting her dark thoughts. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. I have news, the lawyer said without preamble. Good news and potentially great news. I'll take any good news you've got. The private investigator the Johnsons hired to dig into your background? Turns out he's not licensed in Virginia. Everything he gathered is inadmissible in any legal proceeding, and he could face criminal charges for impersonating a licensed investigator. That's the good news? That's the good news. The potentially great news is that I've been digging deeper into Robert Johnson's financial situation, and I think I found something that could end this whole nightmare. Sarah explained that Robert's construction company had been awarded several municipal contracts over the past 5 years through what appeared to be bid-rigging schemes. More importantly, he'd been using properties he didn't actually own, including Amara's house, as collateral for loans from 3 different banks. It's a house of cards that's about to collapse, Sarah said. And when it does, Robert Johnson is going to have much bigger problems than your custody case. How long before that happens? Could be weeks, could be months. But here's the thing. I think we can accelerate the process. The plan Sarah outlined was risky but potentially decisive. If they could prove Robert had been fraudulently using Amara's house as collateral, they could file criminal charges that would not only end his harassment campaign but likely result in jail time. It would require you to be bait, Sarah warned. We'd need him to make another direct threat while we're recording, something that clearly shows his illegal intent. Before Amara could respond, her phone buzzed with another call. Unknown number, but by now she recognized the pattern. Take it, Sarah said. Put it on speaker. Hello, Amara. Robert Johnson's voice filled Mrs. Henderson's quiet living room. I hope you're enjoying your stay with the neighbors. What do you want, Robert? I want to make sure you understand the situation clearly. The fire was a warning. Next time, we might not be so careful about timing. Amara's blood ran cold, but Sarah was frantically gesturing for her to keep him talking. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You have something that belongs to my family, and I will get it back by any means necessary. The house, the girl, both belong with people who can provide proper care. You'll never get Zoe. Won't I? A single mother living in a fire-damaged house, struggling financially, clearly unable to provide a safe environment. Robert's voice was confident, cruel. Any judge would see that the child needs stability. The fire was your doing. Prove it. But I can promise you there will be more accidents, more problems, more scrutiny until you see reason. Unless, of course, you accept our offer and make this easy on everyone. And if I don't? Then things will get very unpleasant very quickly. Your credit will be destroyed. Your employment will be questioned. Your parenting will be investigated repeatedly. Every aspect of your life will be examined until something sticks. Sarah was nodding vigorously, making recording gestures. This is harassment, Robert. This is business. I need that house and I will have it. The money I've borrowed against it comes due in 6 weeks. If I don't have clear title by then, I face bankruptcy and criminal charges. His voice turned vicious. I won't let some nobody librarian destroy my family's legacy because she thinks she's entitled to property above her station. James left me that house legally. James was a fool who got swept up in small-town romance and forgot his obligations to his real family. But his mistakes don't have to be permanent. The line went dead, leaving the room in stunned silence. Did you get all that? Amara asked shakily. Sarah was grinning like a shark. Every word. Threats, admission of the arson, confession to loan fraud, and a clear timeline for his desperation. This is exactly what we needed. What happens now? Now we go to the police, the FBI, and every bank he's defrauded. Robert Johnson just destroyed himself trying to destroy you. That night, as Amara lay in Mrs. Henderson's guest room listening to Zoe's peaceful breathing, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not just hope that she would win, but certainty. The Johnsons had finally pushed too hard, threatened too much, revealed too much of their true nature. Their desperation had made them careless, and their cruelty had been their downfall. Tomorrow the tables would turn completely. The hunted would become the hunter, and justice would finally have its day. Robert Johnson had been right about one thing. Things were about to get very unpleasant very quickly. Just not for the person he'd intended. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Martinez was younger than Amara had expected, probably in her early 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She sat across from Amara and Sarah in the Millbrook Police Department conference room, listening to the recorded phone call for the third time. This is substantial evidence of criminal fraud, extortion, and conspiracy, Agent Martinez said, turning off the recording device. Mr. Johnson admitted to multiple federal crimes during this conversation. What happens next? Amara asked. We build a case. Financial fraud involving multiple banks crosses state lines, which makes it federal jurisdiction. We'll need to coordinate with local authorities on the arson investigation and any state charges. Detective Ray Collins from the Millbrook PD leaned forward. We've been keeping an eye on Robert Johnson's business practices for months. Several contractors have filed complaints about bid rigging, but we never had enough evidence to move forward. Well, now we do, Agent Martinez said. Mrs. Johnson, I need you to understand that once we start this investigation, there's no going back. The Johnsons will know you cooperated with law enforcement. They've already tried to burn down my house and steal my daughter. I'm not worried about making them angry anymore. Over the next week, Amara's quiet life became the center of a major federal investigation. FBI agents interviewed neighbors, examined bank records, and traced the complex web of fraudulent loans Robert Johnson had created. The scope of his crimes was staggering. He's been using at least 6 different properties as collateral that he doesn't actually own, Agent Martinez explained during a briefing. Your house, his deceased father's farm, his sister's vacation home in Virginia Beach. The total amount of fraudulent loans exceeds $2 million. How did he think he'd get away with it? Desperation makes people stupid. His construction business has been hemorrhaging money for 2 years. Instead of declaring bankruptcy honestly, he kept doubling down, using fake collateral to get more loans to pay off previous loans. Sarah whistled low. Classic Ponzi scheme behavior. Exactly. And it all comes crashing down in about 4 weeks when the largest loan comes due. The investigation revealed even more disturbing details. Patricia Johnson had been systematically spreading rumors about Amara throughout the community, contacting school officials with concerns about Zoe's welfare, and even attempting to bribe the family court clerk to fast-track a custody hearing. She's facing charges too, Detective Collins informed Amara. Child endangerment through false reporting, bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud. The whole family is going down. But the Johnsons weren't giving up without a fight. As news of the federal investigation leaked through Millbrook's gossip network, their campaign against Amara intensified. Amara's car tires were slashed while she was at the grocery store. Her mailbox was vandalized with spray paint reading "Thief." Anonymous flyers appeared around town claiming she was under investigation for child abuse and fraud. They're getting desperate, Marcus observed as he helped Amara clean paint off her mailbox. This is the behavior of people who know they're cornered. I just want it to be over, Amara said tiredly. The stress was taking its toll. She'd lost weight, wasn't sleeping well, and had to constantly reassure Zoe that everything would be okay. It will be soon, Mrs. Henderson said, appearing with a bucket of soapy water. The whole town is talking about what's really been going on. People are disgusted by the Johnson family's behavior. She was right. Public opinion had shifted dramatically once details of the federal investigation became known. The same community members who had initially been swayed by Patricia's rumors were now rallying around Amara with increased fervor. Tom Murphy from the diner started a fund to help with her fire repairs. The elementary school PTA passed a resolution supporting her family. Even people who had never spoken to Amara before stopped her on the street to express their outrage at how she'd been treated. "This is what James always loved about Millbrook," Mrs. Henderson observed. "When push comes to shove, decent people stand up for what's right." The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning when Agent Martinez called with excitement clear in her voice. "We got him. Robert Johnson was arrested an hour ago trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of cash and fake identity documents. He was running? Like a scared rabbit. Patricia was with him. They're both in federal custody, and the house of cards is collapsing completely." Sarah whooped with joy when Amara called to share the news. "It's over, Amara. They can't touch you or Zoe now. In fact, given the evidence we have, I think we can sue them for everything they put you through." That evening, Amara stood in her fire-damaged kitchen, which was finally being restored to its former beauty. The contractors had done excellent work, and in some ways the room looked better than before. Sometimes, she reflected, you had to burn down the old to make room for something new and stronger. Zoe came up beside her, slipping her small hand into Amara's. "Are the bad people gone now, Mom?" "Yes, baby. They're gone." "Good. I missed our house. We'll be back in our own beds tomorrow night. Will there be any more scary people trying to take our home?" Amara knelt down to Zoe's level, looking into those serious brown eyes that were so much like James's. "There might always be people in the world who try to take things that don't belong to them, or who think they know better than other people about how to live. But what we learned through all this is that we're not alone. We have friends and neighbors and people who care about us. And most importantly, we have each other. And we have Daddy watching over us." "Yes, we do." That night, as Amara tucked Zoe into bed in their own house for the first time in 2 weeks, her daughter asked one more question. "Mom, do you think Daddy would be proud of how we handled the scary people?" Amara thought about James, about his gentle strength and his belief in doing what was right even when it was difficult. "I think he would be very proud of both of us." As she turned off the lights and headed to her own room, Amara felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since James died. The battle was over, justice had prevailed, and her family was safe. But more than that, she had discovered strength in herself she didn't know existed. She had faced down bullies, protected her child, and stood up for what was right. James would indeed be proud. The hardest part was over. Now it was time to start building the future. The courthouse steps were crowded with media and curious onlookers as Amara walked up them 6 weeks later, flanked by Sarah and Agent Martinez. The federal trial of Robert and Patricia Johnson had drawn attention from across Virginia, partly because of the scope of their financial crimes, but mostly because their victim had become something of a local hero. "How do you feel going into today's hearing, Mrs. Johnson?" a reporter called out. "I feel ready for justice," Amara replied simply. Inside the courtroom, the Johnsons sat at the defendant's table looking pale and diminished. Robert's expensive suits couldn't hide the fact that he'd lost weight in jail, and Patricia's carefully maintained appearance had cracked under the stress of the past month. Federal prosecutor David Chin stood to address the judge, outlining a case that had grown beyond even the FBI's initial expectations. "Your Honor, the defendants orchestrated a complex scheme of fraud, extortion, and harassment that terrorized a grieving widow and her young daughter while defrauding multiple financial institutions of over $3 million. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, recorded phone calls, witness testimony from dozens of community members, and even surveillance footage of Robert Johnson tampering with Amara's electrical panel on the night of the fire. The defendants' actions went far beyond financial crime," Prosecutor Chin continued. "They endangered lives, traumatized a child, and attempted to use the legal system as a weapon to steal property that was never rightfully theirs." When it came time for victim impact statements, Amara stood at the podium and looked directly at Robert and Patricia Johnson. "2 years ago, I lost my husband, the most important person in my world. Instead of receiving support from his family during the most difficult time of my life, I was targeted for harassment, intimidation, and ultimately physical danger." Her voice was steady, strong. "You tried to steal my home, which my husband left to his daughter and me. You tried to steal my child through false accusations and legal manipulation. You tried to steal my peace of mind through threats and violence." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent courtroom. "But what you actually accomplished was showing me how strong I could be when fighting for what matters most. You showed my daughter what it looks like when good people stand up to bullies. And you showed this entire community the difference between real family, built on love and support, and fake family built on money and control. Robert Johnson wouldn't meet her eyes, but Patricia stared at her with undisguised hatred. I don't forgive you, Amara continued. Your actions were unforgivable. But I'm not going to let what you did define the rest of my life. I'm going to focus on building the future my husband wanted for our daughter, in the home we created together, surrounded by people who actually understand what family means. The sentencing was swift and severe. Robert Johnson received 8 years in federal prison for fraud, extortion, and arson. Patricia received 5 years for conspiracy and child endangerment. Their assets were frozen, their business dissolved, and restitution was ordered for all their victims. The defendants showed a callous disregard for the welfare of a child and a grieving family, Judge Harrison said from the bench. Their actions represent the worst kind of exploitation of power and privilege. Outside the courthouse, Amara was surrounded by reporters and well-wishers. Mrs. Henderson and Marcus stood nearby, along with dozens of neighbors and friends who had supported her throughout the ordeal. What's next for you and Zoe? A reporter asked. We're going home, Amara said simply. We're going to finish fixing up our house and I'm going to watch my daughter grow up in the place her father wanted her to call home. Do you have any regrets about how you handled this situation? Amara considered the question seriously. I regret that it happened at all. I regret that my daughter had to see adults behaving so badly. But I don't regret fighting back. Sometimes standing up for what's right is the only choice you have. As the crowd began to disperse, Agent Martinez approached Amara with a smile. You did good, Mrs. Johnson. A lot of people in your situation would have given up or given in. I had a good example, Amara replied, thinking of James. And I had help from people who cared. What will you do now? Live my life. Raise my daughter. Maybe write a book about all this someday. Amara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. But mostly just be grateful for what I have. That evening, Amara and Zoe sat on their front porch swing, watching the sunset paint their street in golden light. The house repairs were complete and everything looked better than before. The insurance settlement, combined with the restitution from the Johnsons, had allowed them to make improvements James had always dreamed of. Mom, are you sad that Grandpa Robert and Grandma Patricia are going to jail? Zoe asked. I'm sad that they made choices that led them there, Amara said carefully. But I'm not sad that they can't hurt our family anymore. Will I ever see them again? I don't know, baby. Maybe someday when you're older if you want to and if they've changed. But that's a decision you can make when you're ready. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. I think Daddy would be happy that we're safe now. I think so too. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus Thompson walked up their front path carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. I hope I'm not intruding, he said with the shy smile that had become familiar over the past months. I thought we should celebrate justice being served. You're not intruding at all, Amara said, making room for him on the porch steps. We were just enjoying the peace and quiet. Over the past few months, as the legal battle had raged, Marcus had become much more than just a friend and ally. He'd been there for every court hearing, every difficult moment, every small victory. He'd helped Zoe with homework when Amara was too stressed to concentrate, brought groceries when she was too busy with lawyers to shop, and simply listened when she needed to talk through her fears and frustrations. Somewhere along the way, without either of them planning it, something deeper had begun to grow. Marcus helped us win, Zoe announced. He's been like a superhero. I don't know about superhero, Marcus laughed. But I'm glad I could help. You did more than help, Amara said quietly. You stood by us when things got scary. Not everyone would have done that. Their eyes met and held for a moment, full of unspoken possibilities and gentle hope. Well, Marcus said, some things are worth standing up for. As they sat together watching the night settle over their peaceful street, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced since James died, the possibility of happiness. Not the desperate, clinging happiness of someone afraid to lose what they have, but the quiet, confident happiness of someone who knows they can face whatever comes next. The battle was over. Justice had been served. And for the first time in 2 years, the future felt full of promise instead of fear. 1 year later, Amara stood in her kitchen making pancakes on a Saturday morning, humming softly to herself. The room was filled with golden sunlight streaming through new windows, and the air smelled of coffee and maple syrup instead of smoke and fear. It was hard to believe this was the same space that had been blackened and damaged by the Johnsons' desperation. Mom, Marcus is here. Zoe called from the living room, and Amara heard the front door open followed by familiar voices greeting each other. Marcus had become a regular fixture in their lives over the past year, moving slowly and carefully into their routines. There had been no rush, no pressure, just a gradual deepening of friendship into something more meaningful. He understood that Amara's heart needed time to heal, and that Zoe needed to feel secure in any new relationship that might affect their small family. "Good morning, beautiful ladies," Marcus said as he entered the kitchen, carrying a newspaper and a bouquet of daisies from his garden. "I brought the latest news about our infamous former neighbors." Amara accepted the flowers with a smile. "More developments in the Johnson case?" Robert's appeal was denied. "He'll serve his full sentence and the restitution order stands." Marcus poured himself coffee from the pot that Amara always had ready for his Saturday visits. "Justice truly served. I'm glad it's finally completely over," Amara said, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. "Though honestly, I barely think about them anymore." It was true. The fear and anger that had consumed so much of her energy 2 years ago had faded into distant memory. The Johnsons had become cautionary tale rather than active threat, a reminder of what happened when greed and cruelty overreached themselves. "Mom, can we tell Marcus about the surprise now?" Zoe asked, bouncing with barely contained excitement. "What surprise?" Marcus looked between them curiously. Amara felt her cheeks warm. "It's not that big a deal. I got some news yesterday that I wanted to share." She handed Marcus a letter from the local newspaper. He read it quickly, his eyebrows rising with surprise and pleasure. "They want to hire you as their community interest reporter?" "Amara, this is wonderful. It's only part-time, and it's mostly human interest stories and local events, but..." She shrugged, trying to downplay her excitement. "It's writing. Real writing, not just checking in library books." "Are you kidding? This is huge. You've always talked about wanting to write, and after everything you've been through, you'll have incredible perspective on stories that matter to people." Zoe nodded enthusiastically. "Mom wrote a whole article about what happened to us, and when she showed it to the newspaper editor, he said it was the best thing he'd read in years." "When do you start?" Marcus asked. "Next month. Sarah helped me negotiate the contract, and the hours work perfectly with Zoe's school schedule and my library job." Amara felt a flutter of nervous excitement. "I never thought I'd have the courage to try something like this." "You have more courage than anyone I know," Marcus said seriously. "You faced down federal criminals to protect your family. I think you can handle small-town journalism." Over breakfast, they talked about the changes the past year had brought. Zoe had flourished in school, her confidence restored and her natural curiosity encouraged by teachers who'd watched her weather the storm with remarkable resilience. She joined the school newspaper and announced her intention to be a justice reporter when she grew up, inspired by watching her mother fight for what was right. The house itself had become more beautiful than ever. The insurance money and restitution payments had allowed Amara to complete renovations James had always dreamed of: updated bathrooms, a larger deck, and a beautiful garden where Zoe could play safely. More importantly, the home felt peaceful again, filled with laughter and hope instead of fear and uncertainty. Mrs. Henderson had become like a grandmother to Zoe, and their neighborhood had grown even closer through the shared experience of standing up to bullies together. The community garden project that had started as a show of support for Amara had blossomed into a permanent fixture that brought families together every weekend. "I have some news too," Marcus said, looking slightly nervous as he set down his coffee cup. "I've been offered the head librarian position in Richmond." Amara felt her heart skip. Richmond was 3 hours away. That's wonderful, Marcus. It's what you've always wanted." "It is," he agreed. "Better salary, more responsibility, a chance to implement some programs I've been dreaming about." He paused, looking directly at her. "But I turned it down." "You what?" "Why?" "Because everything I want is right here in Millbrook." His voice was quiet but certain. "My life is here. You and Zoe are here. This community that welcomed me and gave me a purpose is here." Zoe looked between the adults, sensing the importance of the moment even if she didn't fully understand it. "Marcus," Amara said softly, "you can't give up career opportunities for us. We'll be fine and—" "I'm not giving up anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm choosing what matters most. The Richmond job would have been prestigious, but it wouldn't have made me happy. This life we're building together, that makes me happy." Amara felt tears prick her eyes. For so long after James died, she believed her chance at love was over, that she would spend the rest of her life as a single mother focused entirely on raising Zoe. She'd never imagined someone like Marcus could come into their lives, patient, kind, understanding of her grief while helping her discover she could love again. Besides, Marcus continued with a smile, I have a counter-proposal to make. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box that made Amara's breath catch. Oh my goodness, she whispered. Mom, is Marcus going to ask you to marry him? Zoe asked with excitement. Actually, Marcus said, turning to face Zoe seriously, I wanted to ask both of you something important. Zoe, would it be okay with you if I asked your mom to marry me? Zoe's face lit up like Christmas morning. Yes. I've been hoping you would. Marcus laughed and turned back to Amara, who was crying and laughing at the same time. Amara, he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair, I love you. I love Zoe. I love the life we've built together and the future we could have. I know James will always be part of your heart, and I wouldn't want it any other way. He was Zoe's father and your first love, and he deserves to be remembered and honored. Amara nodded, unable to speak through her tears. But I also know that love doesn't have limits, Marcus continued. Hearts can grow to hold more people, more joy, more hope. I want to be your husband, Zoe's stepfather, and part of this beautiful family you've created. Will you marry me? Yes, Amara whispered, then louder, yes, of course yes. As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple, elegant band with a single diamond that caught the morning light, Zoe jumped up from her chair and threw her arms around both of them. We're going to be a real family, she announced. We already are a real family, Amara said, holding both of her favorite people close. Now we're just making it official. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone home and Zoe was asleep, Amara sat on her front porch swing looking at the ring on her finger. The street was quiet and peaceful, lit by gentle street lamps and the soft glow from neighbors' windows. She thought about James as she often did in quiet moments like this. The grief wasn't gone. She didn't think it ever would be completely, but it had transformed from sharp, daily pain into something softer. A gentle sadness mixed with gratitude for the time they'd had together and the daughter they'd created. I hope you're okay with this, she said quietly to the night air, speaking to James's memory. Marcus is a good man. He loves Zoe like she's his own, and he understands that you'll always be her father. He's not trying to replace you, he's just trying to love us. A warm breeze rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance she heard the sound of wind chimes from Mrs. Henderson's porch. It felt like a blessing, like approval from the universe that she was making the right choice. The wedding took place 3 months later in the backyard of the Yellow House, surrounded by everyone who had supported them through their darkest time. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears as she watched Zoe serve as maid of honor, wearing a pale blue dress and carrying a bouquet of daisies. Sarah officiated the ceremony, having gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. When James and I first moved to this house, Amara said in her vows, he told me it was big enough for a family. I thought he meant the 3 of us. But what I've learned is that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who choose to love you, support you, and stand by you when things get difficult. She looked out at the gathered crowd, neighbors who had rallied around her, friends who had never wavered, community members who had shown her what real strength looked like. This house has seen grief and joy, fear and courage, endings and new beginnings. Today it witnesses the start of our next chapter, built on the foundation of everything that came before. Marcus's vows were simple and heartfelt. I promise to love and honor both of you, to build a life that makes room for memories while creating new ones, and to prove every day that I'm worthy of the trust you've placed in me. As they exchanged rings and kissed to seal their union, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Zoe threw flower petals in the air, Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and somewhere in the celebration, Amara felt James's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Not possessive or jealous, but loving and approving. That night, as the last guests departed and the 3 of them cleaned up the remnants of their wedding celebration, Zoe asked the question that had been on her mind all day. Mom, now that you and Marcus are married, should I call him Dad? Amara and Marcus exchanged glances. They discussed this possibility but wanted to let Zoe decide for herself. You can call me whatever feels right to you, Marcus said gently. Marcus is fine, or Dad, or something else entirely. You have a father who loved you very much, and I'm not trying to take his place. I'm just trying to love you in my own way. Zoe considered this seriously. I think I'd like to call you Dad Marcus. Because you're my dad now too, but Daddy James was my first dad and I don't want to forget that. Dad Marcus sounds perfect, Marcus said, and Amara could see he was fighting back tears. Later, as they sat together on the porch swing that had become their evening tradition, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been a grieving widow facing the fight of her life. Today she was a wife again, a mother still, and a woman who had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. Any regrets? Marcus asked, following her gaze across their peaceful street. None, Amara said firmly. Not about fighting the Johnsons, not about staying in this house, not about taking a chance on love again. All of it led us here. Even the scary parts? Especially the scary parts. They taught me what I was capable of when protecting what matters most. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Amara thought about the future stretching ahead of them. There would be challenges, there always were, but she faced them now with confidence born of experience. She'd stood up to bullies and won. She'd protected her daughter and preserved her home. She'd honored her first love while opening her heart to new love. The yellow house stood solid and beautiful around them, filled with the laughter and love James had always envisioned. His dreams for their family had come true, just not in the way any of them had expected. Sometimes the best endings were really new beginnings in disguise. Zoe appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" "Always," Amara said, making room on the swing. The three of them sat together in the gathering darkness, safe and content and surrounded by love. In the distance, they could hear Mrs. Henderson moving around in her kitchen, the soft hum of evening traffic, and the gentle sounds of a community settling down for the night. "I love our family," Zoe said sleepily, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. "I love our family too," he replied, wrapping his arms around both his girls. Amara smiled, thinking of James and knowing he would approve of this moment, this peace, this happiness. The Johnsons had tried to destroy what he'd built, but love had proved stronger than greed, community had proved stronger than intimidation, and hope had proved stronger than fear. They had indeed picked the wrong target. And in the end, that mistake had led not to their victory, but to something much more beautiful. A new chapter in a love story that refused to end, even when it seemed impossible to continue. The yellow house settled around them like a blessing, and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility.